So in this video, we're going to take a look at the account of Jesus being anointed in Bethany in John 12, 1 through 11. So I'll go ahead and read the verses first. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priest made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. All right, a couple of things here to note about this passage. First of all, there are similarities between this story and some anointing stories that you can find in the Synoptic Gospels. So most notably, an account of anointing in Mark 14, which has a parallel in Matthew 26. And then there's another anointing story in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 7. So there are similarities because we have, women who are doing the anointing. We have Jesus being anointed in a way that is attracting attention to people because he's sitting at a table. But there's also some differences, whether he's getting anointed on his head or is he getting anointed on his feet. And so there's oftentimes raised the question, was there only one anointing or several? So the question that scholars are looking at, was Jesus anointed once? And these accounts here are referring to the same anointing, but placing them in different parts of their stories and telling them in different ways. Others see, well, maybe there are at least two anointings, the one that we have in Luke's account, Luke 7, which is much earlier in Jesus' ministry, and then another one that occurs kind of later towards the end. Now, of course, then that raises the question, when just comparing it to Mark and Matthew, put aside Luke's account, does John's account have the correct chronology of this event? So in other words, did this happen before or after Jesus' triumphal entry in Jerusalem? So in John's account, it is happening before he goes into Jerusalem, whereas in Mark and Matthew, it is happening after that event. So questions are then, was it actually two events, one before he goes in and then one afterwards? Or is it the same story that is just being placed at different times around the time that he entered into Jerusalem? One needs to remember something about chronology and the Gospels here, that the Gospel authors are not primarily preoccupied with making sure sequencing happens. Events are sequenced in exact chronological order. If events happen around the same time, whether one reports it before or after, is not as nearly as important as what is the message or the idea or the theme that is brought out by that event. So we have to be careful not to impose upon the Gospels expectations of chronological exactness as we might do, say, for a biography today. So John's account does have some ironic elements in it, especially in this account that we have, this anointing is going to be anticipating Jesus' death, but it's, so he says, this perfume for the day of my burial. So we know that Jesus' death is coming. and all of this comment about Jesus' death is taking place right there in front of Lazarus, who's at the table, whom Jesus has raised from the dead. So we see that Jesus has power over death. And so even though he is going to be preparing to die, um, that this idea of him being dead should not be of a concern as much, because obviously there's going to be a resurrection as well. So there's a little bit of irony here just about where it takes place and who's present. So that's kind of unusual. That's unique in John's account. So in the Matthew and Mark, we don't really have a story about Lazarus being present. So this account emphasizes that the extravagance of the anointing. So we do have a lot of perfume. The Greek word myron is equal to what we would call nard. And it is very expensive. So Judas notes that it's worth a year's wages. So quite expensive. So it may be indicating something too of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus as being people of some wealth and some means. Maybe they are the types of people who donated or contributed to Jesus' ministry, provided them with funds to take care of themselves as they traveled and preached. And we also see that Mary uses her hair to wipe off excess oil. So that event is somewhat similar to evidence that we do have from literature that servants would be present when people would put on oil. And if they did have excess oil, the person who has the oil will take their hands and wipe the oil on their hands and then wipe it on a servant's hair in order to dry their hands off. And so here that her own hair is being used to do that. I don't know if some have speculated in other accounts whether or not this activity is somewhat sexual in a nature, provocative for a woman to have her hair down and have her hair exposed and doing this particular type of activity. Nothing is really made out of it in any of the gospel accounts. The story introduces Judas Iscariot. So here he is as this character that we know is going to betray Jesus. So the audience probably already knows this. They already know about the betrayal. And so it's mentioned or emphasized about who he is. And what we're also told here is that his concern, so he's identified on the accounts in the other Gospels don't identify who it is, but John's account identifies it as Judas, and that he used to be in charge of the funds. So money was probably given to Jesus and disciples either to help with costs of getting food, or maybe they had this bag that they used for almsgiving. We don't know what this money bag that they had was used for, but Judas seemed to be trusted with it. And I kind of wonder, why was Judas trusted if Jesus as well might know that it's going to be Judas who is going to betray him, why he allows him to have the funds and allows him to steal from these funds. So regardless, this helps to indicate something of Judas's character. So Jesus' response in verse 8, you will always have the poor among you, shouldn't be read or shouldn't be taken that, okay, you don't really have to take care of the poor because they're always going to be here. Jesus doesn't seem to be that concerned about the poor, that, he's taking, as it were, the potential for that money to be used for the poor. It shouldn't really be seen as rejecting help of the poor, but for this story, it's really trying to prioritize the preparation for Jesus' death, which will be unique because Jesus is not going to be around. You're not going to be able to demonstrate your devotion or gratitude or reverence for Jesus for much longer in particular physical ways like this. So the story is going to be ending here then with the idea that a large crowd of Jews are going to be attracted to see Jesus, knowing that he is in the house, and particularly what he has done for Lazarus. So here we have this large crowd of Jews. In the Greek text, it has the Jews. And so in this instance, the phrase the Jews is not used to refer to Jewish authorities. Other places in John's gospel it is. But here it's just to a group of Jews in general. And once again, we're going to see that some of these Jews are going to end up coming to faith. So their interest in Lazarus leads them to believe in Jesus. So, but of course, the concern always in John's gospel is about people's belief in Jesus based on signs. Signs are not really things that usually convert people, and people can look at signs and make certain judgments about Jesus. But what is it that they really have faith or belief in? It's certainly oftentimes not a full understanding of who Jesus is. So there's always a little bit of hesitations about the power of signs. But nevertheless, here we are being described as wanting to come to him and believe in something about him based upon the experience of Lazarus. So this, of course, raises concern for the chief priests. So we have the size of the crowd is probably going to give concern. So what is happening, so we don't imagine that the chief priests are there. The chief priests are not present seeing these crowds coming to this, but it's probably reported to them. So once someone goes and reports to the chief priest about the crowds coming and wanting to see Jesus, wanting to see Lazarus, now we're seeing the level of opposition is growing, so that now even those who are blessed by Jesus or who understand what it is that Jesus can do, they are now in danger. And so the chief priests not only want to kill Jesus, but now they're going to try and kill Lazarus as well. So those who are in Jesus's circle or Jesus's community are under threat, as it were, from those Jewish authorities. All right, we will leave that there as a quick kind of review of John 12, 1 through 11.